Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this April 2025 HVG event all about inclusive recruitment. Our events programme, hopefully you all know, are supported by Team Kinetic. So we're very grateful to them for their ongoing support in our new programme from this month onward. As previously, we're going to record the presentation parts of this session. If you've got any problems as we go along, please pop them in the chat. But without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the fabulous Tamsin Russell, who's going to introduce herself and the session. Thank you, Tamsin.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and absolutely delighted to be here today in a very overcast and sort of autumnal day in Scotland. So I don't know where you're all joining from. As a visual description, I'm a mid-50-year-old woman, 54 last week, with a blunt fringe, bright red lipstick, black glasses, long hair, and I'm sitting with a variety of greyness behind me, both in the sky and in the room. My pronouns are she, her, and I am delighted to be here today. What we are going to be doing in the time that we have together really is ring fencing time for you to think about inclusive recruitment. Now, inclusive recruitment is one of 3 workshops that we at HVG put on around the inclusivity agenda. Inclusive practice is one of our values, and we're absolutely committed to making what we do and how we support you as inclusive as possible. But we also know that inclusion from a volunteering perspective is a challenge. And it's often a challenge around how much it might cost to come and volunteer in terms of travelling. Also sometimes can be a challenge because the way that volunteer models or roles are established are immovable. They're too concrete for flexibility, and that sometimes has an impact. Myself and Liv, who's also on the call, did a whole session around older volunteering last month with Better Impact, and we talked specifically about the challenges around engaging that particular audience and also retaining that audience or volunteer group, I should say. But today we're going to be talking about inclusive recruitment, which is one of those 3 workshops that we have developed specifically around inclusive practice and volunteering. So the time we have together really is a time for you to make connections with other people on this call. We want you to be able to network and learn from others. So thank you to everybody who has put in the chat function where they are and also what organisation they might be in. We are going to be doing breakout rooms. Nothing scary like a role play, but we will be doing some breakout rooms during the course of the hour that we have together again. So I'd encourage you, wherever possible, to share details, share where you're located, because the people in this space are a hive mind of professionals that work in this space. So you'll be able to learn from them and they will be able to learn from you. What we hope is by the end of today, you feel more confident in working inclusively and more competent in working inclusively. And now I have no doubt that we are competent in this area of work. But what I know from my conversations with people around inclusion is because it is such a fast moving space, the language changes quite quickly, that people often feel as if they aren't up to date as much, or they can't say something in case they cause offence. What I want to sort of reassure you is that what we're going to be going through hopefully should improve your confidence and competence. And by that very token, also then make sure that you feel more able to do your job, and therefore your own well-being will be enhanced. So those are all of our sort of objectives for today. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation afterwards. So unless it helps you to take photographs, feel free just to be in the space and be in the conversation. And we will be taking questions probably at the midpoint. If you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking in front of everybody else, the beauty of Zoom is that you can send that question directly to Rhiannon and she can ask that question anonymously on your behalf. or you can send it to me, or equally, you can send it to either of us after the session and we can answer it. And then the final plug really around this area of work, because we know it's dynamic, we know that something may well present itself in your work in practice and you don't know what to do, is we do have the inclusion forums. So we run a half an hour inclusion forum, usually on the same day as our free events program, that is a safe and confidential space for you to say, look, I'm in this situation. This is what's happening. I'm getting pushed back from my senior managers, or I've got an issue with a volunteer, but there is a diversity component around this, and I just don't know what to do. So again, questions today, feel free, use the chat function, or equally contact Rhiannon or myself. But those inclusion forums that we run on a monthly basis are really your opportunity to get immediate support and help and guidance if you're facing a particular pressing issue.
No, it's not. My headphones aren't working.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share my slide deck. And as I've said, you will get a copy of this slide deck afterwards. So don't feel as if you have to, make copious notes. And remember also, this session is being recorded. So inclusive recruitment and selection, April 2025. Who knew? It's already April 2025. So what are we going to be doing in today's session? It's divided into 3 parts, and we're going to have 3 breakout rooms. Because I truly believe that if we all share, we all learn, and we will all be coming to this with different levels of experience that we can share, or we can listen to somebody else and be inspired or make a connection about this. So these 3 sections are going to be punctuated with 3 breakouts. And at the end of each of the breakouts, I'm going to invite everybody back into this space. And we're not going to do death by feedback. What we are going to do is just have an open forum to say, did anything come out of those conversations that you'd like to share more broadly? Usually there's tumbleweed, and that's absolutely fine. But if you do want to share some of your conversations, we want to make sure that you have space to do exactly that. And then it says Q&A at the end, but we will be asking questions halfway through. So the first breakout, and Rhiannon's going to put you into a breakout very shortly, is a breakout for you to introduce yourselves. So you're going to have a little bit longer to have a conversation. You're going to have 10 minutes to have a conversation. And I want you to introduce who you are in your space. And then I would like you to have conversations with whoever is in the room about, what do you understand by the term inclusion? What do you understand by the term recruitment? What do you understand by the term selection? Okay, so I want you to have a conversation about those 3 terms. I think we've got, how many people have we got in the room, Rhiannon? We've got about 18.
Yes, so I was thinking 4 rooms of 4.
Perfect, excellent. So if you could open those rooms up, and we will let you know, remind you what you're going to be looking at, but we'll see you back in 10 minutes time. Wonderful. I think everybody's back pretty much. I've got a lovely full screen. 18 is such a perfect number, isn't it, for Zoom? So hopefully you got to meet people you don't know that could literally be in the next village, town or city along. Really would encourage you to think about how you can make connections with others who are doing similar jobs in similar contexts. For those of you that have attended sessions with me before, you know I am obsessed with definitions. Why am I obsessed with definitions? It's because there is so often a real risk of confusion if I am talking about something from my perspective and standpoint, and it is completely different to what your understanding of something is. Now, I'm not saying, although I will be sharing with you shortly, some sort of holistic and generic definitions that are cross-cutting, but what you might find is your own organisation defined those 3 words in a particular way, and that is fine. You just need to make sure that everybody that's involved in any of those processes in your organisation understands how it's defined in your organisation. And especially if you're new to the organisation, you might be coming to it with a particular understanding from your previous organisation and then wondering why you're not being able to influence as effectively or to make change. So I do think having that discussion within your organisation can be really, really helpful. So you have collective understanding, and that means you can all walk together in the right direction, knowing exactly what you're talking about. So I will open it up to the group just for a couple of minutes, just in case anything came out of your conversations that was either surprising, reassuring, interesting, inspiring, whatever in word you want to do. But yeah, anything that came out of those conversations around how your organisations define those terms. And as I said previously, this is usually when everyone looks down. So it's absolutely fine. I feel comfortable in that space. That's okay.
Well, we were just looking at the way we use recruitment and making sure that that's like minimum barriers as much as possible. So, you know, like to try and make it as inclusive as possible. So it might be things like, you know, looking at the forms that we do to make them simple as possible, different ways of actually accessing that recruitment. You know, maybe removing some of the barriers, like the need to have like a professional reference, for example, that might prevent some groups from applying.
And so what Alex has just done there perfectly is he started talking about recruitment, and then when we start talking about references, that's selection. So understanding the difference between recruitment and selection can be really helpful to identify where you're investing your time and energy, because it will identify where the most significant barriers are. So perfect BBC link. So let me just get up to my slide deck. And so we just got here, I think, into the breakout room. And so I was asking you to reflect on the concept of inclusion, recruitment, and selection. So first of all, in terms of inclusion, your organisation might use different terminology. So they might also use equity as opposed to inclusion. They've got subtle differences, because equity is around affording every individual, based on wherever their starting point, to have the same starting point. You may well have seen an image depicting people looking over a fence to watch a ball game. It's an American image, and the idea of sort of equality is that everybody would get exactly the same step or box to stand on. But that might mean if I'm shorter, of which I usually am in a room, that one box is never going to be enough for me, actually. For me to be included, I need interventions that are not about equality, everyone getting the one box. I need interventions around equity, which means that I get 3 boxes because I'm the person that's the shortest. But when we're talking about inclusion, what are we talking about? So inclusion is the act or state of including or being included within a group or structure. So your group or structure could be, your group is a group of volunteers, your structure could be your organisation, it could also be a project, for example. Inclusion also is the practice of policy of providing equal access to opportunity, resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalised. And that comes back to my just sort of very quick, dirty, blunt explanation around the difference between equality and equity. So equality is about giving everybody the same box so they can see over the fence. Equity is acknowledging that some people need more than one box to be able to see over the fence. But it still gives you that access, equal access to opportunities and resources, but what we might put in might be different. So when we're thinking about this definition, act or state of including or being included, etc., you have to do something. So it's active, you can't just talk about it. And one of the things that I'll get you to start thinking about in the next breakout session is the extent to which is your organisation paying lip service to inclusion? Are they saying the right words? is there the rhetoric, but not the reality in terms of what they actually do rather than what they say? Are they being, again, another word that we hear a lot is, are they just being very performative? Yes, we're extremely inclusive, until you want to be included. Oh, no, we can't do that. The practice and policy of providing this equal access to opportunity. Again, what we've got here is around groups. And then this is about the right groups. So you, again, might find in your organisation, and if you don't know, it's a really good question to ask, is has your organisation identified any particular groups that they feel need to have greater equitable support to enable them to access the opportunities? And it could be in a policy or a procedure or a strategy or your corporate plan. So if you don't know, if it's not obvious, then ask that question. In this organisation, is there a particular group that we are prioritising to engage with from an inclusion perspective? So you can see from the slides, whilst I am absolutely an executive board member of HVG, but I also am the workforce development lead or workforce development lead at the Museums Association. And so we've identified 4 groups that we are doing more work with. So inclusion is absolutely our accepted practice, but we've identified 4 groups that we know from evidence are less likely to be seen. And this is from an employment perspective, but it could easily be transferable to volunteer populations. But we know in the sector, we see that there is less representation. There are fewer people from the global majority, from LGBTQ plus A groups, individuals that identify with those sexual orientations or gender identities. We also know that we see fewer people represented and participating as either a volunteer or as a member of staff from a disability perspective, so people that have or disclose a disability or long-term health condition. And then finally, we also know, even though it's not protected by law, that we see fewer people from working class backgrounds represented and engaged in volunteering or employment. So we are doing something. Number one, we're taking action, and our practice and policy is around providing this equal access. And so we are ensuring that those 4 groups that have had previously less opportunity for progression, participation, development, whatever you want to say, we are going to be engaging with those groups. Those are the right groups. From your perspective, and we'll come to it in a minute, it could be you've looked at who participates and what your volunteer profile is. And what you then need to do is think about how you engage with a particular group, a particular community group, for example, that isn't reflected in your volunteer population. But understanding what your organisation describes inclusion as, and also understanding whether your organisation has identified particular prioritised groups for engagement and inclusion, really can help you get them on side. Okay, so they're not going to argue with their own data. If they're saying this is really important and these 4 groups are important, every time I say, oh, I'd like to do this, I say, because it's going to engage with these 4 groups. Okay, so lobbying is really important. So what's the difference between recruitment and selection? Recruitment is an attraction of a field of applicants. And I'm going to use the word applicants there as they relate both to volunteers and also staff. But the whole idea is about attracting to a field of candidates. And what you want to do is attract to the widest pool of candidates, not just the usual suspects. Okay, so it's attracting the attraction of a field of applicants, and those applicants should be diverse as opposed to always being friends of the museum, because that's how you get your messages out. Okay, selection is different to recruitment, because selection is that process of being able to select between them to create your candidate list. Okay, so and by candidate list, I mean anybody that you're going to have, whatever conversation you're going to have with them, because organisations select for volunteers in a different way. I was just on a call just a moment ago discussing people that have applied to volunteer on a particular scheme in Scotland, And we have just gone through in a very methodical way, what skill set are they bringing? Because we need the volunteers to have a skill set because it's around a particular type of role. So we have attracted a field of candidates. We advertised in loads of places. And now what we've done is looked at those candidates and we've started to select between them to enable us to then have a more deep conversation. So inclusive recruitment practice, essentially, or inclusive practice, requires both of these. So we need to be inclusive and extensive in attracting a field of candidates, no surprise there. We also need to ensure that the processes that we adopt to select are also balanced, non-discriminatory and non-prejudicial. So this is a process flow document that I use to describe the different steps that you might have, again, for an employee or for a volunteer. Again, you might find that the terminology is different in your organisation. So in our organisation, we do have sort of mini appraisals. We still call them appraisals for our volunteers. In another organisation, that would have been called an annual review. But the process I want you to think about is, okay, so where are we recruiting? How are we selecting? When they come on board, how are we making them feel part and parcel of the organisation as quickly as possible? So that appointment and induction, what does that look like for performance? What does that look like in terms of making sure they feel recognised and celebrated? And where applicable, depending on their volunteer motivation, they are feeling developed and able to progress, whatever those drivers are. So, for example, you might find a lot of your volunteers are volunteering with you with the express goal of becoming or gaining paid employment at the end. That may not be your experience, but if that is your experience, this might be the process flow document. So another breakout. And Alex already started alluding to things that might enable the process to be more inclusive. So ultimately, that's what I'd like you to talk about now. So Rhiannon, if you could set up breakout rooms, I'd like you to discuss with your groups in a far more granular way, okay, what is your current context, i.e., do you have a sense of volunteer groups, protected groups governed by law, or other sort of community groups that are currently not participating as a volunteer? Also, what do you currently do that may well be adding to that, i.e. adding to why they're not coming? And are you doing anything that you think is working, and how do you know it's working? So I'm getting you to think really from both the positive side and also the improvement side, looking back using the, okay, recruitment, attracting a field of candidates, selecting between those. Okay, so we're just focusing on those two parts of the process. So over to you, Rhiannon. Again, the idea of these breakouts is for you to cross-pollinate and share good ideas, because you may not have thought about something that somebody else does as a standard practice. So, okay, as ever, I've prioritised you talking to one another as much as anything else. So we have only got 10 minutes left. So I am going to just sort of go through, but feel free to share anything in the chat function. I cannot labour how doing a process review can really, really help you. And doing that process review, post-it notes are your friend, or a virtual whiteboard is your friend, around identifying, and if depending on the size of your organisation, getting people that are involved in this, having a sense anecdotally where the biggest barriers are, and you can make them very visual, so it's really, really clear where the biggest barriers are in any sort of process flow, but also enables you where you have got evidence around where those barriers might be, to also then inform any changes you make. My experience of trying to influence change in organisations is often they're more likely to listen if it's going to save money, make money, or is evidence-based. Okay, so if you can say the reason I'm making this recommendation to be more inclusive is because we know X, Y, and Z, and the potential benefit around this is we look more attractive to future funders, but also we're more represented. Now, being really clear around how I think ethical and moral work contributes perhaps sometimes to a more strategic or commercial or monetary approach can really, really help. So let me just share the slide deck. Not all of you will undertake these, depending on where you're located. The legislation that existed, the 2010 Equality Act, highlighted the need to do equality impact assessments around different types of work. However, depending on the size of your organisation, whether you're a public sector or not, and also ultimately your organisation's commitment to inclusion may well mean that they are not as hot on equality impact assessments as perhaps they could be. This is essentially an information gathering process. So I just talked about getting people around a table and with post-it notes work out where the biggest barriers are. That's great. That's anecdotal. That's experientially led. However, as I've already highlighted, sometimes getting the metrics can really, really help your argument to influence change. And that might be about identifying your current volunteer profile, comparing that with your local demographic, then identifying these priority areas of engagement for particular groups and what that then looks like in terms of scope of action, reviewing your processes in general around exclusionary practice. And again, depending on what data you take, and absolutely would agree with Alex, we need to be making sure that when we're asking individuals for information, we ask it at a point whereby it's not going to put them off. So, for example, when I advertise for volunteers, I don't ask individuals to complete an equality monitoring form, even though ultimately when they are onboarded, then I will ask them for it. Pre to that, I asked them to give a very light touch description of anything that may have a positive impact on their engagement based on their background and their heritage, etc. Not exactly presented exactly that way. In terms of how else you might want to be making changes, speaking to existing volunteers and their network, although there are risks. You know, if I'm only talking to the friends of the museum, the likelihood is I'm going to then only get people that are very similar to the friends of the friends group, which is fine if you're trying to get more of those people, but really not an answer to expanding or diversifying your volunteer profile. Speaking to colleagues within your organisation, so it could well be the individuals in the learning teams have really good connections with either service providers or agencies or community groups. And again, you might want to speak to existing community groups that you've already got relationships with that may enable you to access further community groups. That's called a snowball technique of communication and relationship building, where you ask one group to introduce you to the next group, sort of like a more virtuous pyramid cell. In terms of recruitment, things that we need to be thinking about, and I'm not going to go through all of these different lists, I'm just going to pick out one or two, is you know, highlighting or looking at ways in which if somebody is already engaged in the museum, how can they take that engagement as a visitor and then be that translated into being a volunteer. Okay, it's a really good metric, a really good legacy of a program. As we ran this program around Eid, and then actually, as a result of that, we engaged with these particular community groups. We had lots of people come to the museum that would never usually have come to the museum or to the zoo or to the botanical gardens. And they have now engaged with us as longer term volunteers. So things around that conversion rate, things around longer timelines to apply or appropriate support with application completion, especially where there may be somebody where English is a second language, or maybe there be an underlying processing issue like dyslexia, for example, where somebody might need additional help. You are trying to demystify volunteering and your organisation for a number of different people. So taster days can really be helpful. Some video footage can be helpful. Making sure that it's very flexible in terms of micro volunteering or event volunteering, rather than the, yes, you need to volunteer every Tuesday afternoon between 3 and 8 p.m. You know, that you're not going to be as attractive to different groups of people. And payment of expenses, what we know around trying to diversify our volunteer profile is that economic austerity, financial precarity is often associated with belonging to multiple different groups, also known as intersectionality. So I'm more likely to be less well off if I am a woman from the global majority with a disability. So how am I going to be prioritising my money if I haven't got the payment of expenses? So these are just some of the ways in which you can look at this. And then also from a selection perspective is just making sure that you really are only asking questions if you are needing to, and everybody can adopt different approaches, and only asking people to do things if it actually makes sense for them to do it. And this is this concept of face validity. So only get people to do things that they might well be doing as part of their volunteering role. And you might also want to, from a positive action perspective, is offer people training to enable them to complete the application or to participate in an open day or a group interview or whatever it might be. But there are lots of ways in which you can make selection far more inclusive. Digital can be hugely helpful for individuals with caring responsibilities, underlying disabilities, or again, that socioeconomic status. And what I will do as a result of this, I will highlight this and then tick them against all those protected groups. So we've got a little matrix. So I'll do that as part of my work for the EDI group. I want to challenge you to think about these questions. Well, what can help you? Who can help you? How can you help yourself? What help do you need? And how can we help? And by we, I mean HVG. So you will get this slide deck in after today. And there's loads of different things that you can use. You know, the legislation, the Museums Association Code of Ethics are really two really important aspects, you know, to help you use language to influence change and know what you should do and what you could do and what you must do. And also the Code of Ethics highlights very clearly about how you should be working transparently. And there are other resources. So I've just highlighted here the Inclusive Recruitment and Selection resource, the Museums Association, but also Make Your Mark, which is a fantastic organisation working around volunteering in Scotland. They have loads of toolkits around inclusive recruitment. So there is, in a way, so much stuff out there. I appreciate that it's hard to know where to start. But what I would say, the key aspects are, how does your organisation define inclusion? Have they already identified priority groups to work with? If they've not, that's a piece of work for you to do. And then what is reasonable for you to be able to do with your limited resources to make any process more inclusive? There will always be opportunities to make it perfectly inclusive, but that may not be a possibility for you at this point in time. So that brings me to, with 1 minute to go, sorry, the end of my presentation. I'm really happy to stay on for a wee bit, but I know people have to shoot off. But what I would say is come to the EDI forums. We run them on a monthly basis. We absolutely can help you deal with any of these recruitment and selection questions or any ROBs or issues around influencing. I'm now going to hand over to Rhiannon.